Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are on this fast forward planet, which is wrapped in so many layers of turbulent change. It's hard to keep track. Um, I've been tracking the climate change part for 40 years now, which is insane itself. But there's so much else going on, and some of it feels like theater of the absurd for those of us who are immersed in it, because so much of it seems to just kind of repeat itself and reverberate. And this is Andy Revkin. This is Sustain What, a special show on the role of the arts, in particular drama, in conveying the climate challenge, and also in hopefully not just conveying it, but getting people to change what they're doing and how they vote, or whatever the thing is you can do to make a difference. There's this play that I became aware of through David Doniger at NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, had tweeted about this a couple of years ago. There was a play in Stratford and then London about something that to me seemed initially impossible to conceive of as being turned into drama, which is the COP process, the Conference of the Parties, the whole Framework Convention on Climate Change cycle. And yet it's done very well. It did well in England. It's just had a run at Lincoln Center Theater here in the States, which I unfortunately could miss because I live in Maine now. And one of the downsides of living in Maine is you can't just pop on down to New York City to see every play. We're going to have a fast-paced conversation here with the two writers of the play, both named Joe Murphy and Joe Robertson, with Ben Santer, who was one of the early lead authors of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that underpinned and still underpins the treaty process, with Jean Chemnick, who just joined here, and who is a longtime writer for E&E News, Climate Wire, and that's all part of Politico now. She did a piece in the 2018 or so, a two-part series that laid out the whole Donald Pearlman Saudi slowdown process, and also Jenny Chalant, who's at Natural Resources Defense Council, who has seen the play, and Ben has seen the play several times. So that's the starting point. Thank you for all of you for coming on the show. And because Joe and Joe have a limited amount of time, I'll probably spend a little more time with them through the first few minutes, just getting at this remarkable achievement. Congratulations first to both of you for completing these two runs so far, and I assume more to come. Is the play spreading at this point?
We definitely hope so, and one of the exciting things is it's also being translated into different languages. So we're anticipating a few different productions in German, and in it's already been in Japan, actually, in Japanese. So hopefully the
Spain as well. But yeah, we're hopeful many more to come.
That's so great. So I want to just show a very brief scene for those who have not had the good fortune to be at the play. This is sort of a promo, a little Lincoln Center promo.
If you're a guy like me looking at a time like now, the main thing you think is, man, the 1990s were freaking glorious.
Who is he?
He's a lawyer.
Just a lawyer?
What they're deciding in those rooms is a direct challenge to the idea of America.
Did the scientists even consider possible benefits?
You can't rip up civilization on a hypothesis.
Pick a side, fight for it, or your enemies will destroy you.
I will wrestle this process into an agreement for the sake of your children and...
So boy, oh boy. First of all, again, congratulations. It's very dynamic. Like a couple of other plays I've been to, I understand audience members get to sort of take part in the negotiations, essentially. They're given a placard, and some people actually sit at the table, the round table, or at least in these two, the way it was framed.
Yeah, it was always our intention from the start to think about different ways of getting the audience involved. I mean, we're all involved in this world of ours and everything that comes with it. So when we entered the theatre, one of the first ideas, actually, before we even had any inkling about the specifics of the story was that everyone should be given a lanyard, like you do when you arrive at a COP. You're a delegate, or you're a member of the press, or you're part of the secretariat, what have you, and that's a sort of gesture towards feeling part of the action, and it's something that gets strangers to talk to each other, and hopefully about the play.
And on a thematic level, the problem with both climate change and also storytelling around climate change is it feels so often so unbelievably vast and huge and complex and impossible to solve. And I think there's a huge amount of despair and disempowerment that comes in a lot of storytelling around climate change. And there was an attempt, from us in our production to really say, well, come and join us for a seat at the table. Look at these human beings who have made their whole lives work shaping the way we use and transition away from fossil fuels, and hopefully leave audiences feeling that individuals and groups, when they work together, can change things, that this problem isn't intractable. So that sort of spoke to sort of the heart of the play, really.
That's great. And now here we are, we just finished COP 30. And like Ben, I've been at this since before COP 1, 1995. And I'm just going to play briefly this kind of ironic headline from the BBC.
In the past half hour, leaders at the COP30 climate summit in Brazil have agreed on a deal that ends the summit but fails to mention fossil fuels. Talks had been deadlocked over the issue and carried on hours after the summit.
So they reached an agreement to agree, but they left out a critical component. And part of this is a function of the reality of the world. It's still 80% energy is come from fossil fuels. It's not like you can easily come up with a pathway out. But when I was tweeting about this the other day, there's Mohammed Al-Saban, who's very active on Twitter. He's not active in the negotiations anymore. And he said, "Dear Andrew, the game is over. All of your lies and the work you've done has been uncovered. You should retire by now and tell your mafia members to do the same. You have accomplished nothing and you keep moving in circles with no real outcome." When I saw it initially, it got under my skin, but then, there's some reality there. And maybe if each of you could just, actually, we'll go down the line here very briefly to say the treaty, the play is a vital portal on this. And at the same time, the challenge remains profound. So maybe just briefly, Ben, after COP 30, what's your sense? And then also Jenny and Jean.
I think Mohammed Al-Saban was wrong. The game is not over. The science has progressed profoundly since the cautious, wimpy balance of evidence suggests statement in Madrid in 1995. We're now at unequivocal human fingerprints all over the climate system. Costs of renewables have come down precipitously. Mohammed Al-Saban is a dinosaur. He doesn't understand that the future is not in oil, is not in fossil fuels. And individuals, countries, and companies that figure out cheap, efficient ways of providing low carbon energy to the world are going to be the leaders of the 21st century. He doesn't get it.
I sort of wonder if there's sort of a difference. I mean, if there is a difference between, the COP process and global climate action, because it is possible that the COP process, has shown it's not really fit for purpose. I mean, like to a certain extent. I mean, not completely, but there are limitations in the way it was designed. You guys got at that so well in the play as well about consensus versus a majority vote. Maybe it's just time for the next chapter or for a certain amount of focus to move to other venues. So
I think that's Jean Chemnick speaking, by the way, and I'm showing one of the really important articles she wrote back in think I can't read the small print. I think it was 2018 or so that really got at the sort of backstory behind the people throwing the sand and molasses into the gears. And Jenny at NRDC, Natural Resources Defense Council, just a quick thought on where the play was and where we're at.
Yeah, well, I think progress is definitely always a 2 steps forward, 1 step back game here. And if you look at the starting point for climate negotiations, as was told in the play, we've come a long way from those 35 years ago. I think one of the lines that they were debating, the delegates were debating in the play, was one that said climate change will have economic and social benefits as well as some risks, and I think that's the conversation's really moved from that point today.
Okay. So Joe, you saw Brazil unfold. What did it feel like?
It was very strange having the play on while it was happening, and every day feeling that in the theatre and in the performances. And I don't know about you, but a part of me, there's a deep despair that it feels like so much of what was going on 30 years ago is still happening. The obfuscation, the debates over phrases and words, and but then there's also a hopeful part of me that feels like actually, in spite of Don Pearlman and everything that the Mohammed Al-Sabans of the world have done, this process is still moving, inching forward, in no way fast enough and in no way radical enough. But the show is still on the road, the train's potentially still on the tracks, and I'm trying to be hopeful. I'm trying to see a world that is, in spite of itself, changing. But that might sound naive. Joe, what do you think?
I sort of think that we must sort of hold our hands up. We're 2 playwrights, and we've sort of thrown ourselves into this amazing world and been welcomed by so many people into trying to understand it. But it seems to me that COP is sort of full of optical illusions. Like you want it to be the case that every COP produces a stronger and stronger agreement that leads us in the right direction. But it's, for whatever reason in our species, I think often we require the disagreements to reach strong agreements that eventually get us further. And there are cycles within COP, sort of broadly 5-year cycles often, and where you eventually get to a stronger agreement. And I would hope that we are on the track towards a very significant one in the coming years.
Yeah, and I want to just sort of flip back to your origin story a little bit, the 2 of you, because you've taken on another really tough issue in your playwriting together, and actually it was the thing that launched your whole project. Really, it was the refugee crisis, the sort of displacement of people around the world. Just briefly talk about the larger drivers of your passions as writers and artists. There's a through line here. So just briefly step back. You were in your early 20s when you went to Calais or something like that?
Yeah, it was really the moment of I suppose our artistic, political, and social awakening was traveling to the jungle refugee camp in Calais in 2015 in the middle of what was then called the European refugee crisis. Although right now that just feels like the European refugee reality. This mass movement of people that we've all come used to. And we found in the jungle, which was an unofficial refugee camp, 10,000 people from about 25 different countries, all by night trying to get to the UK, but by day building on the sand dunes and this landfill site on the north coast of France, a kind of town. And there were restaurants of different cuisines, cafes, shops, churches, mosques, legal centers, health centers. We're of the opinion every town needs a theater, so we ended up building a theater there, and the theatre was for everyone of all nationalities and religions and races, and we told stories together and made work that either confronted or escaped, what people were going through, and I think that awoke in us a realization of our place in a very vast and interconnected world, this huge global village of different needs and nationalities and wants and backgrounds and contexts. And that became the sort of, the basis of our company, Good Chance, and of our artistic sort of interest in how we live together and how we work together, in how we move forward as a species in spite of the, on paper, insurmountable differences that divide us. And that's really what sparked our fascination and love of the world of Kyoto and the COPs and the process to find agreement on climate change, because it's all about people in a room, more different than people can be, trying to find a way forward together.
Absolutely. And doing it in a sustained way. So now let's dive into the play. And, we're going to talk about Don Pearlman, and we're going to talk about Ben Santer with Ben Santer, and then get into sort of next steps. Again, what pulled me in, of course, was my own trajectory, which started in 1985 with a story on nuclear winter, another kind of climate change, and then this one on 1988 on global warming.
Yes.
And that, then that's been my story. And then these negotiations, I was there in 2000. There's a headline. The top headline, of course, was about the fight in in the United States about Al Gore and George Bush, who was going to be president. And I was the little headline on the left about the negotiations on Kyoto. This was this sort of what happens with Kyoto breaking down.
Yeah.
And then the Saudi story became part of it, and of course the oil lobbies, and then the play. So what drew? There had to be a specific moment or something when you actually said, "Oh, we need to write a play about this thing." What was the spark?
Do you know what we were having? We were having conversations back in, it's a few years ago now. It must be sort of like just coming out of COVID, a really difficult time for the whole world, and it felt like the few years before that as societies we were struggling to have complicated conversations, that somehow it was sort of like as individuals and groups we were sort of digging into our own opinions, and it was less and less possible to have those complex conversations. So we were sort of searching for a story that sort of overcame polarization, and we came across. We were listening to BBC Radio 4, and there was this wonderful program that's called Reunion, and there are sort of many different versions of Reunion, and it just so happened that this one was about the Kyoto Protocol, and it gathered together 4 people who were there in the mechanics of the of formulating the protocol, and it was a slightly strange experience, because they were talking about this agreement that we'd sort of heard about, but not really. If we're being honest, hand on heart, we didn't understand what it was. There it is. Gosh, that brings back memories. Yeah, and so much of this debate was difficult to understand, because these wonderful people were getting quite emotional about things that we couldn't understand why it would be something to be emotional about. They were getting emotional about commas, about words being placed in a certain way or retracted from the sentence altogether. And we're going, gosh, there's an emotion to this specificity in this environment. And then it reached the point in the episode where they were talking about the moment of agreement, and just it struck us that this notion of a unanimous agreement, every single country in the world, and of course, there are problems after that moment in terms of countries following it or properly signing up, but that moment itself, let's take that every country agreed, and it spoke to us to this conversation we were having about polarization. And it felt to us like a miracle. So it felt suddenly like something that would be worth finding a way to stage, even if it's so much about commas.
Yeah. You guys have a hard. You have to leave in about something like 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So we're going to keep rolling forward. I'd love to have, if there's a chance, if Jean, Jenny, or have a question for you too, or Ben. But I want to show one other clip from the play, which I think really gets at this idea.
Oh, I think we don't have sound.
Oh, right. Yeah, I have a technical issue where the sound didn't come through. As you can see, they're arguing over language, as you were saying, cut urged.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the bracketing, that whole business about the language was surreal as a journalist to be tracking. I wrote a piece about brackets. There's a thing in these international negotiations called a non-paper, and I wrote a piece about the idea of a non-paper, which is basically something where no one can be blamed for it, but they can start to have these negotiations. And this, ultimately Kyoto itself, the Kyoto Protocol, ended up being kind of a dead end.
Yeah.
And then, but the process led to Paris, and Ben and maybe Jean and Jenny, Paris felt like a failure to many people who were looking for language that was hard and firm, like a target timetable, policed regulatory approach. But it was liberating in the sense that it allowed countries to come with their own plans on their own terms, to have a negotiation going forward for what they can do, to test each other's ideas. And that is that part of what you see as success, Joe and Joe, having looked at this? And then I think I'll ask quickly from Ben and the others too. It's not so much about a hard binding target timetable thing, but a way for everyone to sort of shave off the hard parts.
I think I'm going to speak more generally. I don't know whether this speaks directly to that question, but we've spoken to a lot of people who talk about, imagine a world without Kyoto, and imagine a world where the Kyoto Protocol never happened, or the COP process never happened, and we were quite on track for arriving at 5 to 6 degrees 30 years ago, and actually that's not on the agenda now, not in the time frame that we're looking at.
Right.
And whatever in the hard nuts and bolts of it, actually, although it was a failure in many ways, actually it was a small step on a continuum that has got us to where we are, which is nowhere near far enough, but actually would be far worse without it. And then on a broader cultural point, I know that they're sort of insanely unwieldy, multi-headed hydra now, where you have to knock down bits of the rainforest to fit people into these COPs and get cruise ships in to house them, and arguably you've got to that has to be reformed. But the cultural power of these things, of shaping the sort of the oil tanker of humanity, when on the other side you've got the massively well resourced tactics of those trying to undermine and destroy this message very successfully with populations around the world. You go, gosh, the fact that tens of thousands of people do gather together and keep this boulder rolling up the hill. Again, we're artists and we're not in the midst of it, so we err towards romanticism, and that may be our flaw. But there's I don't know whether that answers your question.
Well, I think, we'll get to Ben and Jenny and Jean. We'll talk more about this after Joe and Joe have to leave. But this is also sort of a reflection of human nature, and everyone's grappling with their own lives, which is always imperfect and always sort of rolling a boulder. We never have a perfect outcome. We're always negotiating, whether it's with our family or our uncle who thinks Donald Trump is the best thing ever, and finding that rocky path forward. I think one reason a play like this resonates is because it does that. I do want to get into the grunt work you had to do. And this, we're going to talk about Ben in a second too, but I was very impressed that you found a way to dramatize. So you dig back put in the drama that in 1959, Edward Teller, one of the architects of the atomic weapon world, and an advisor to the government on many things, had spoken at a conference at Columbia University, where I used to teach, on energy and man, and he laid out, in 1959, for these 7 sisters, as you call them in the play, the big oil entities, the reality of this. And Ben, of course, this will resonate for you. So how much? And you also you tracked down Shirley Pearlman, the widow of Don Pearlman. We'll talk about Don in a minute, but
Yeah.
how did you? That's really hard stuff. You were doing basically journalistic work in a way to building this play.
Yeah, and we've been helped by a couple of wonderful people at Good Chance in doing that. And but we took a bit of a punt in that we knew that Don had a son called Brad and reached out to him. And must say actually at this point, Don's family have been incredibly generous to us in talking to us about his life and I won't speak for them, but they've been to the play a number of times and have expressed a real joy that the play is on. Sort of more broadly than that, we did a lot of reading, spoke to as many people as we can, and it was partly in that reading really that we came across the story of Don that led us to the story, because it was this name that kept appearing often in footnotes, actually, in books that we were reading. And I mean, you all know this much better than us, but it's a very sort of specific genre of literature when you get to work on the cops. And there are a number of books, but you wish that there were many more. But we kept coming across this name, and always in very, very interesting places, always sort of insinuating a real power that this person Don had over the process, and we wanted to understand more and more quite how somebody, an individual, pre-internet and sort of pre the digital age could wield such an influence, and we just became more and more fascinated by him and by how someone could, like an individual, could have such an influence over a multilateral process. I mean, there seemed to us an absurdity in that, and we really just followed that instinct. And it's an incredible story. Don was, for his moral flaws, an incredible mind. And I think there's a lot to learn from the fact that Don could influence so much, and obviously the tactics that Don employed are different to those tactics that are, or there are more tools, let's say, in the toolkit for people of a similar mind to Don now. But there are still lessons to learn, I think, from this story.
Yeah, we'll talk about the dark side with Ben in a minute, even if you guys have to leave. I just wanted to point out, I got to know him on the floor of the negotiating halls, like other journalists. And I was sifting back through my stories. He would never talk to a journalist on the record, but he was always, as you were saying, he was always trying to kind of shape things. And here's a quote that's in a piece of mine from, how did you describe him? A Washington lobbyist for foreign oil exporters who spoke only on condition of anonymity. That's kind of the Don Pearlman way. And I mean, I had environmentalists who would talk to me the same way if they had a leaked version of a draft report. But we were, as a journalist, we were always kind of in the middle there, hearing, being with people trying to spin things. So, I'm glad, the play, as you say, it kind of, he had his own sort of moral frame, which was America first, and which is getting resurgent now, as we'll talk about further with Ben and Jenny and Jean. And before you go, Joe Murphy and Joe Robertson, any last thoughts on where to go from here? I would love to see some broader version of this made into a movie of some kind, so we can get it some more audiences. Or are there any wider plans for what you're doing?
Well, Kyoto is the first play in a trilogy of plays. The next one ending around the time of Copenhagen in 2009, and then the third play going sort of Paris and beyond, and potentially to the present day. So we'd like eventually, in a sort of RSC history cycle way, give audiences the opportunity to sit through not just 3 but 9 hours of UN climate negotiations in the theatre.
Oh my God!
Because that's what
everyone wants. And then we would love the space in a sort of series or a film to really delve into these into these stories, because the great thing is you know, we must have spoken to 50 people researching it. We now must have spoken to 250 people who have come and seen it. And everyone's coming with the most amazing stories and the most amazing insights. And, well, did you know it was actually here that it happened? And so diplomats have become much less diplomatic, which we love. And we would love to stay in this world because it feels like such an important one.
Well, it is important for sure. And thanks again for taking the time to come on here. And if I'd love to have you back on sometime to go into more detail.
We would love that, and thank you for having us. And yeah, we wish we could
We're
stay
so
longer.
sorry we can't stay. We have a board meeting, but we.
Oh gosh.
Yeah,
I know. But would have been lovely to talk more to you all, but we'll talk again soon.
We promised that we would come back, and we would love to. Ben, now that you're over here, we'll be seeing you next week.
Look forward to seeing you soon.
All right.
Great.
Thank you, Jean.
Thanks, Andy.
All right. So thanks to the two of you, and onward and upward. We're going to keep talking here a little more about the aspects of this play. Let me. Yeah, I really, boy, I'm still so impressed with what they've done. Maybe let's start with Jean, because you did a lot of the homework on this in your reporting a number of years ago. Could you sort of spin your head back to that time, the mid, whatever it is?
You know, I had to go and reread all that. It has been a number of years, and I focus more on domestic than international these days.
Right.
And I talked to you for that story, or at least one of them, the ones about the early days of COP and Don Pearlman. Anyway, yeah, I mean, I guess in reading it, you know, this morning, I was struck that the tactics have sometimes stayed the same. I mean, it's still the broad tactic of delay is definitely something that has carried over, including in domestic climate policy, you know, with conservative administrations, with the Trump administration. Although I was also struck that, you know, being involved in the process certainly was a smart strategy for Don Pearlman and previous administrations. And now the Trump administration has departed from the process and is not there to, you know, exert any kind of influence. And I kind of wonder if that's a tactical error on their part. You know, I feel like, I mean, Saudi Arabia is still there and
Right.
doing a lot of the same things, but the Trump administration isn't attending the meetings, isn't part of the, you know, the process, and thus has no ability to delay anything.
Yeah, for sure. And you know, relying on proxies, you know, whether they're in touch with Saudi Arabia about carrying some of our water is an open question, but it's not like being there. No, for sure. And the U.S. delegations were always involved in, whether it was Bush or you know, Biden or Obama or Clinton. And if you're not in there, you're missing opportunities. And Jenny, you know, several people at NRDC were longstanding players in this drama, including within the Clinton and Biden administrations and Obama, and then back to NRDC. You wrote that a piece after you saw the play, and maybe you could just briefly discuss a little bit more about some of the aspects of what the piece showed. You know, you could, as we said earlier, you could look at this and just say, "Oh my God, we're in Waiting for Godot," which I saw a play I did see recently, which is kind of the endless wait for something. But as you said about Shirley, Don's wife, is in the play, and there's a sense toward the end that of this point that's been made about sort of incremental progress. So Jenny, you maybe reflect a little bit on NRDC's role, and then, you know, what you see after having seen the play.
Yeah, I mean, I think incrementalism is and was, you know, how it works. And I think, as Jean said before, you know, there's also many other levers that are, you know, pushing climate action forward outside these diplomatic conferences like, the marketplace, etc. But yeah, as far as the play, I think one of the reasons that I really enjoyed my time seeing it was how engaged the audience was made to feel in the process, and how that is everything to us at NRDC, is creating a world of environmental stakeholders and reaching new audiences, including through the arts. Because that is ultimately, like you said, how we move people to action. And I really felt, between wearing the delegate badge as an audience member, the whole time you're given a badge in the lobby to wear, and, watching the people at the center table, on the stage, the audience members, hold up their placards, sort of encouraged by the actors that they're seated next to. You really feel like you're part of it, and it's, just so important.
Yeah. So Ben, back to you. So this, I have, as I said, I've only read the play. I marked up a key page here, which was part of where you come in 1995. And Fred Singer, another one of the lifers, so he's gone now, says, "We have a problem," talking to Donald Pearlman. And you were the problem, essentially. You were the voice of the problem being the physics. But so can you reflect on, what it felt like? Well, when did you first learn about the play? Before it was done? Were you involved with them in the research part?
Yes, during COVID, I was here in my fortress of solitude in the wilderness of Southern Oregon, and the two Joes were in the process of writing Kyoto, and we met via Zoom on a number of occasions. They were interested in my experiences at this seminal IPCC plenary meeting 30 years ago now in Madrid in November 1995. That was the meeting at which the scientists and governments present agreed on this historic 12-word finding, quote, "The balance of evidence suggests a discernible human influence on global climate." And as the Joes just mentioned before they left, one of the extraordinary things about that 12-word finding was that every one of the 96 countries in the room in Madrid agreed. The Saudis, the Kuwaitis, all of them signed off on that. Just like 2 years later, all of them signed off on the Kyoto Protocol. In retrospect, it really was an extraordinary event, and that cautious 12-word finding has been replaced most recently in the 6th assessment report of the IPCC in 2021 by unequivocal. It's now unequivocal that human fingerprints are all over the climate system, atmosphere, oceans, land. So Fred Singer and Don Pearlman, back in Madrid in 1995, recognized that there was this fundamental change in scientific understanding. Climate scientists were using, back then in the early 1990s, pattern recognition methods to go after the specific signatures of different human and natural effects on climate. So to better understand the natural effects of changes in the sun, or volcanic material in the atmosphere, or internal variability, things like El Niños and La Niñas, and they were exploiting pattern differences to identify the climate signals caused by fossil fuel burning. Singer and Pearlman recognized, I think, what scientists didn't recognize at the time, the political implications of that work. It was the scientific equivalent of the biblical handwriting on the wall for the fossil fuel industry. Science was saying, humans are affecting global climate. We're no longer innocent bystanders in Earth's climate system. And that's what precipitated what the two Joes describe in Kyoto, this scorched Earth strategy to destroy the science and to go after the integrity of individual scientists, to delay, as Jenny and Jean mentioned, by going after science and scientists. And they were very effective at doing that.
Yeah, and that became very personal as the play lays out. And you said it's still hard for you to. You've seen the play several times, I think, and there's this scene where your character is describing. There was a rat left on your door at one point. This was pre-internet. Harassment is worse than internet harassment, and your son was traumatized by this. So maybe recount a little bit of what actually underpinned that, and then your feelings about how the play captures it.
I've watched Kyoto 3 times, in Stratford, in London, and at the Lincoln Center. It's not easy sitting in the audience and listening to a dramatic retelling of some of the things that happened to me and to my family after the discernible human influence finding in 1995. It's tough. It's like reliving trauma.
Yeah.
But I come away from that experience of watching my life unfold on a stage, not with a sense of anger or resentment or victimhood, but of gratitude. What we did back then, 30 years ago, really mattered. Those 12 words were important. They were the first time that the international scientific community spoke with one voice and said, we can see it. There's a human-caused climate signal. And that changed everything, not only for Pearlman and his paymasters, and it changed the way the entire world thought about our role in Earth's climate system. And I feel profoundly grateful that together with brilliant women and men all around the world who worked on the science of climate change, I was a part of that understanding. And I'm profoundly grateful too, just let me say here, to the two Joes. I published, together with my colleagues, many, many dozens of papers on climate fingerprinting. The two Joes have reached audiences that I could never hope to reach through all the papers I've published. They've reached tens of thousands and will continue to reach through Kyoto and through Copenhagen and Paris, their next plays. They will reach many, many people in the world and get them to think about the consequences of being on the wrong side of history and on the wrong side of science. What does it mean for you and everything you hold dear if you deny the science of climate change, if you delay solutions? What do we lose? What do you lose? What do your kids and grandkids lose? The two Joes get us to think about that. As they said in one memorable line when they were asked to comment on their Time 100 Climate Leaders Award, every performance of Kyoto is a rehearsal for a better future.
It's beautifully put. They must be good writers.
They are.
Yeah. Well, I thank you all for participating in this show today, which somewhat time constrained. Jean and Jenny, if you had any last thoughts about the play's significance, or the spin in it, the focus on an anti-hero instead of a hero. Their camera could have been focused on Ben as the hero, but they put this right on Don Pearlman, which I think works in a way that is well. Hopefully, it'll propagate as they said in different languages and going forward. So maybe Jenny and then Jean, any last questions, thoughts about, or actually any questions for Ben also?
Yeah, sure. Well, one of the lines that the play sort of starts on and ends on is about disagreement, and it's being part of human nature. I think in the beginning, after that monologue that you played a clip of, he says that no one was going to get everything, that you can't get everything that you want. And at the end, he says, or towards the end, he says to his wife, disagreement, well, it's human nature. It's what we are. And I just think that's, he's such a, in a way, a rounded character, like an anti-hero, like you say. And I think those words are true. He does a lot of hurtful things, but I think that the point that he makes and that the Joe's made about how important and significant it was to come to that consensus, with all these different stakeholders, with all these different interests in their home countries, says a lot.
And I just have to point out too, your reporting these days is focused primarily on the current efforts to not just impede, but disassemble and reverse progress related to a transition from fossil fuels to non-polluting energy sources. So that challenge persists way beyond the dimensions of the time covered by this play. You're in the thick of it right now, and thanks for keeping at that as well. Here's just one example of your coverage.
Sure. Yeah, I cover a lot of regulatory things. I wonder, maybe this would be a question for Ben, because I didn't see it either. I enjoyed reading the play. I have a theater background, actually, so this was fun.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, no, that was my undergrad, actually. So that's why my ears kind of perked up when you said that there was a play out there. I had missed that they had written this, and I didn't see it. But question for Ben. Obviously, I mean, what they explore, a lot of what they explore is these efforts to cast doubt on the science back in the 90s, right? And that is continuing. I mean, that continued through the aughts with ClimateGate, and it's continuing today with the DOE report that is part of the proposal to get rid of the endangerment finding for greenhouse gases. Do you think that it's as successful? Is it working as well as it did 30 years ago? Because it was a good tactic for them in terms of delay. Back then, are they getting the same bang for the buck these days that they did then with this, or do you see any evidence that the discussion has sort of moved past that?
Thank you for that question, Jean. I think it was easier to cast doubt on the science back in 1995. Science was still embryonic. The use of patterns to try and disentangle human and natural effects on climate was only beginning. Fast forward to now, the on-the-ground reality of human-caused climate change is overwhelming. As I mentioned earlier, it's everywhere. We've done fingerprinting the entire global scientific community, not only with temperature, which was pretty much all that was available back in the early 90s, but with every possible observable ocean heat content, Arctic sea ice, moisture in the atmosphere, clouds, atmospheric circulation patterns, increasingly impact-related variables like drought, for example, changes in the statistical properties of extreme events, frequency, intensity, duration of extreme heat. And the red thread running through all of this work, many, many hundreds of studies, is nature alone can't do this. You need strong human agency to explain the changes we've measured and monitored all over the world. So it's a tougher sell in 2025 that this is all natural. There's this huge disconnect between those kind of false claims and the reality of human-caused climate change. Nevertheless, as both you and Jenny, have reported and continue to report, there are these powerful individuals who continue to make these arguments that this is all natural when it's not, and that humans have no impact whatsoever on Earth's climate system when we do. I think that going back to the play, these folks are on the wrong side of the science, they're on the wrong side of history, and they will be judged harshly. They are being judged harshly in real time. Look at the DOE report. It comes out in July 2025. It claims the science is unsettled. It regurgitates old zombie arguments about climate change that have been addressed by the community for decades, and it's immediately debunked. It's immediately shown to be something that is just not credible. It's embarrassing for the administration and for all those involved with it. That's different, that immediate debunking, than what was possible back in 1995.
Yep. Well, this has been a great conversation, and it's probably a good time to pause and stop. Thank you again for being part of it, and along with the two playwrights, Joe and Joe of Good Chance, which is a really interesting theater and arts organization doing many things beyond play production. And we'll have to revisit some of these questions going forward. And definitely, Ben, I'd love to have you back on to talk about the 30-year reflection on where the science has changed, how the science has changed, and how that can and sometimes doesn't change what countries are doing. And keep up the good work there at NRDC, Jenny, and Jean. Keep digging in on what's going on in the current surreal theater of the absurd that we are living in, called the Trump era. This is Andy Revkin. This is Sustain What? You can share this as soon as we're done with anybody. Go back to the website, revkin.substack.com, to see a lot of the context. And you get in touch with me for future shows using the information in that distracting scrolling bar at the bottom. And let's go on with the week and the year and the decade, and keep working a little bit to make the world a little more promising for everybody. Take care. And thanks again to my guests today. Hold on one second.